Yeah, why don't you go ahead? Well, good morning, everyone. This is Director Brushatsky, co-chair of the Governor's Drought Interagency-Coordinating Group. Welcome, everyone. I think we have a meeting agenda up on the screen. I'll turn it over to our folks to go through the webinar logistics.
Thank you, Director Brushatsky, and thank you all for joining us today. We ask that you please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you are a member of the ICG and would like to speak, please type your name into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. If you're a member of the public, please type your questions or comments into the chat. You can also unmute yourself when there's an opportunity for public comment. This meeting and everything written in the chat will be recorded. The recording will be posted on the ADWR public webpage. And lastly, if you're experiencing any IT challenges or difficulties, please contact the ADWR help desk 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Maggie. So welcome, everyone, again. I think folks know, but I'll repeat this. This group has met biannually since 2006 to make a recommendation to the governor about whether to maintain the drought emergency declaration, which has been in place since June of 1999. This is an advisory group to the governor composed of over 20 federal and state agencies. We will have presentations that will provide us with the necessary information and data for us to be able to make that recommendation. And we will decide on the recommendation after those presentations. So I think we can get right into our presentations, and we'll start with Dr. Saffel's presentation, a drought status update and monitoring technical committee activities.
Thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and get started. It's good to see everyone. Thanks for being here. And you'll see that, there we go. The things I'm going to talk about will be brief, but giving you an overview of what we've been experiencing across the state for the last 7 months or so. So next slide, please. And then we do bring into account temperatures when we're talking about impacts to our water supply, because when we're looking at hotter temperatures, we're looking at a thirstier atmosphere. And so it becomes part of the indices that we evaluate. And just overall, looking at kind of starting in October, if you all remember, we were coming off of a very strong heat wave at the start of October and then breaking a lot of records. We did have some precipitation in October, but November was when we started cooling off. Things seemed back to normal. We had cooler systems that came through in November, but then December ended up being very hot. It ended up being the hottest December on record. October was the hottest October on record. January cooled off again. We had a few cooler systems come through. February was warmer. We had mostly ridging and a few drier systems come through. February was the 20th driest February on record. March and April, we had 3 wetter systems, so that was a good thing. But overall, March and April were still warmer than normal. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And so now looking at precipitation for the last 7 months, and you can see what's happening with our map there. We have a lot of record dryas, much below normal across the state. October was mostly dry. We had dry conditions, western, central, southern counties. November, we did get some precipitation, mostly eastern counties. December was the 2nd driest December on record. January was dry, the 5th driest January on record. There's that February again, where we did have that one wetter system in the middle of February, and then March and April really came forward. We're really grateful. We had 3 wetter systems each month. They didn't hit every part of the state, but it's important to remember when we're looking at March and April, statistically, those are the drier months. We're starting to move into the drier months of the year. So even though we did have good precipitation in March and April, still lower amounts when we're looking at the inches, actually, the actual inches amount. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of where it landed when we're looking at the last 7 months, the start of our water year 2025. Looking at that precipitation that we had in March and in April, included in what we're looking at here, water year 2025, 38% of the long-term precipitation. So when we're looking at that, the long-term, we're going back to 1895 and looking at October through April. So what those 7 months look like historically, and on average about 6.62 inches for the long-term precipitation. What we've received for the time frame that we've been in a long-term drought. So since 1994, that you can see we drop about an inch, 5.85 inches. And then what we've received this October through April, 2.5 inches of precipitation. This has been the 4th driest October to April on record. So next slide, please. And the same thing impacted what was going on with our SWE. So we're looking at the snow water equivalent, largely below median. And again, remember, statistically, higher amounts expected in winter in December and January. By the time we reach February and March, we did start to get some precipitation, and you can see in March for the Verde Basin and the Little Colorado Basin a little bit better. And then in April, you're seeing a little bit better there. But when we're looking at those median amounts higher than median, it's still a very small amount of precipitation when we start to receive this in March and April. So that's important to remember. So when we're looking at the Verde Basin reaching 114% of median April 19th, that was still only 0.8 inches of SWE. Next slide, please. So where does this land us when we're looking at how do we stand right now for the first 7 months? What's it going to look like for the end of the water year? Looking at some of the statistics, there's an extremely low probability that we're going to have a median that ends up being 100% normal. There's a 10% chance of that, but more than likely, we're not going to receive 100% normal water year precipitation. I think it's also helpful to understand when we're looking at these kinds of situations. You can see this was the 4th driest October to April on record. So what did the first 3 look like? So you're looking at them right there. So the first driest October to April, water year 1904, that ended up being the 6th driest water year, even though it had a wet summer. When you're looking at number 2, water year 2002 ended up being the driest water year on record. It also came into a very dry monsoon season. The 3rd, 2018, ended up the 8th driest water year on record. They ended up coming back with a wetter summer. So even if we were looking at, and hopefully we will, Mark will give us a little idea of what we can expect for our monsoon season. But even if we do get an exceptional monsoon season, we're still going to be at a lower end of our water year precipitation. Next slide, please. And so then what you're looking at here are the impacts when we have a dry summer and then a dry winter. We experienced this previously when we're looking at a very hot and dry summer 2020 and followed by a very dry winter 2021. And you remember what our short-term drought maps look like, large amounts of exceptional short-term drought across the state. So we're kind of in that boat again. Currently extreme drought covers 55% of Arizona. Largely moderate and severe drought is at 38% of the state, mostly in the northeast counties. Exceptional short-term drought. You can see there in Mojave, we've got a little in Yuma, we've got in, the southeastern counties down there. That's 6% of the total state right now. So definitely still in that kind of extreme and exceptional kind of conditions. Next slide, please. And then what does it look like when we're trying to evaluate what's been going on with longer term droughts and looking back at as far back as 32 months, we can see that we're dealing with very exceptional and extreme kinds of long-term drought, still having those kinds of conditions. When you're looking at these kinds of things, statewide, May 2024 to April 2025. So the last 12 months, what did that look like? The second hottest on record. The first hottest on record, May through April, that was 2017 to 2018. And that ended up being a very dry water year. Statewide, May 2024 to April 2025, second driest on record. The first driest May through April on record was May 2020 to April 2021. They were helped out by a very wet summer in 2021. So that exceptional long-term drought has expanded. You're seeing that in Mojave, Coconino counties, and has remained entrenched in Maricopa and Pima counties. And next slide, please. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Questions from members of the group for Dr. Saffel? Seeing none, I do have one question back to, I don't know what slide number it was, but when you had the long-term record, period of record, you, I think, drew a trend line for the last 30 years. So did I see that on that slide?
Oh yeah, so let's go to slide 4, I think, is where we're gonna look at the water year. So go back a little bit here. Yeah, one more.
Maybe the one, yeah.
There it is, where it's going down.
So what is that trend
So-
compared to the whole, to the prior period of record?
Looking at this latest long-term drought, I put that marking as 1994. And so that's what we're marking right there. If we were to start it, a lot of times different parts of the state, you're going to see that maybe it wasn't until 96 and it'll kind of flatten out. But we're still looking at an inch lower than what that long-term is.
Okay, I just thought it would be good to highlight.
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
And that maybe as our potential future or worse. All right, hearing no questions or comments, we can move on then to agenda item 4, weather outlook for 2025. Mark O'Malley is with us from the National Weather Service.
Thank you, Director Brzezinski. So Erin gave us a little bit of bad news, so I'm going to bring a glimmer of hope here going into the summer. Just a glimmer, though. We need a lot more. We obviously need multiple seasons to ameliorate this drought, and that's not going to happen over the summer. So next slide, please. So we've been looking at this La Nina cycle over the winter, and that's those blue colors in the middle of the screen. And they generally disappear in the last several slides here, and that's the decay of the La Nina. So we're done with the La Nina phase, and we'll be neutral through the summer. The other area we want to look at is up near the Baja, California, just off the coast of California. And the cooler blues up there in the last several images do start to warm, especially in the Gulf. This area can change pretty quickly. And this is important for us in the summer monsoon because this is one source region for the moisture that streams into Arizona. So the warmer the waters are in the Gulf of California and off the Baja, the more prolific moisture we can get in here in the summer. And it's showing signs of warming, so that's good for us. Next slide. So the La Nina forecast going forward, it's pretty much stuck right in this neutral area around 0. There's a few models that show it up in the El Nino red section and a few models that show it down in the blue La Nina section. But by and large, the preponderance of evidence shows that we'll be in neutral conditions through the fall of 2025. Next slide. And this just shows the uncertainty going forward. Fairly good confidence going through the summer and early fall season. But once we get to end of next fall into the winter, there's far more uncertainty on what we'll end up with, whether it be a neutral or a La Nina, nearly equal odds of that occurring. Now, I will say, making these forecasts 9 months out this time of year, the confidence is generally fairly low. There's a predictive barrier that we see this far out. So I only put so much stock into forecasting a La Nina or neutral going next winter. Go ahead, next slide. But I do want to cover the summer because that's most important here. And click ahead one more and we can see the probabilities in the Phoenix area. 46% chance that the July, August, September accumulated monsoon, that the average temperature during that time frame, we'll be in the above normal category. If you combine the above and near normal category, you're looking at nearly 80% chance that we'll be in that range. Click ahead one image here, and this shows the trend over the past 50 years since the mid 70s. And it's fairly notable on here where we're warming 0.7 degrees per decade. And this is across the entire state. So we're not just talking about a few cities here and there. We're talking about a large handful of data, which has warmed at this rate over the past 50 years. Notice 3 of the past 5 years have been the 3 warmest years on record for the state of Arizona. I don't see this trend changing very much. If we're lucky this year, and I think we might get a little lucky, we won't hit any of these extreme records, but maybe we can get something down in what we had from 2012 to 2016. Click the next image forward. But even if we got something that's down towards where we would consider normal for the past 30 years, if you go back 50 plus years, that would have been one of the warmest summers on record. So we have to consider that as a water manager, the evaporation that we're seeing, even in a cooler summer now, would only be comparable to the hottest summer 50 years ago. So what we're seeing now is fairly unprecedented and needs to be taken into account. And that's why Aaron and we always show these temperature graphs, because that makes so much difference on the amount of runoff that you're going to see. Go ahead, next slide, please. This is the good news. Following the recent monsoons following a dry La Nina, largely have been wet monsoons. 2021 was a year that we were coming out of that dry 2020 summer and the dry 2021 beginning of the water year. Well, our monsoon that year was phenomenal, and that knocked us out of the D4 and D3 drought. We can hope that happens again this year. 2011 was a little weaker across the state, but largely most of these years were quite good for monsoon rainfall. I will note that even in some of the great good years, 2022, 2018, you can still pick out spots in those maps with below normal precipitation. And that's just the nature of thunderstorms during the monsoon. So it might be a good season across the state as a whole, but there still will be people who miss out. But we can hope that a few benefits come from this. Go to the next slide. So this is the probabilities, and click one more ahead. We can see for Phoenix, probability of above normal precipitation during the monsoon is 40%. You combine the above and near normal, that's nearly a 75% chance. So 3 and 4 chance that you'll be above normal at your house this summer. Go ahead and click one more ahead, and you can see the trend over the summer. The long term, the past 50 years, is really not much of a trend. That's highly variable across the summer. And this is the entire state, again, not just 1 or 2 stations. This is multiple stations. So it's just highly variable. Almost, if you look at this, becoming more highly variable in the past 20 years or so. Those green dots represent the years I showed on the previous graphs of those 6 good monsoons following the dry La Nina years. So you can see where we stack up. Hope to fall in one of these years this summer. So go forward one more slide. So this goes and looks at next winter. It has a very La Nina flavor toward it because the models do incorporate that probability, as marginal as it may be, that we may enter La Nina next winter. We can hope that this does not come to fruition. Again, very low confidence in these forecasts, but there is a slight shift in odds towards warmer and drier than average next winter. So we need to prepare and plan for that going forward. So go forward. I think I have my conclusions next. So the odds favor a warmer than average summer, and that's mainly based on trends over the past 30 to 50 years. Hopefully we'll be in the average instead of the much warmer than we've seen recently. There's a slight increase in odds for a wetter than average monsoon, but there will be people who don't get average. That's just because of the randomness of thunderstorms. The best case scenario I see for this summer is it will reduce the demand. So that's good for our local reservoirs. We could possibly even see a little bit of low inflow into some of the local reservoirs. I know in 2021, I think the Salt Basin and the Verde saw some inflow. So I would not be surprised if we see that. It's not going to help our overall hydrologic situation and our water resources, but if any little bit helps. There is moderate confidence will be in neutral and so conditions through the summer, but low confidence thereafter. And there is some odds suggesting a drier and warmer than normal winter. We need to consider it is a low confidence, but we need to plan for it. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Questions from Mark, from members? Thanks for that glimmer of hope. We'll move on then to the next agenda item, item 5, Colorado River Water Supply Update. James Hefner from DWR will lead us through that discussion. James.
Thank you. And now that you've had your glimmer, we turn to the previous program. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. The existing status on the reservoirs, Flaming Gorge is at 86%, Blue Mesa 63% for Navajo. Volumetrically, it's about 3.1 for Flaming Gorge, about 500,000 Blue Mesa, and a little over 1 million in Navajo. Lake Powell, Lake Mead, 32% respectively, 7.6 million acre feet in Powell, about 8.4 in Lake Mead. Total system storage, 40%, it's down from 42% at the same time last year. So next slide, please. As for where we're headed, it's less than ideal for precip in the upper basin. The upper green was an exception, have above normal precip in that area. Caught some of that moisture coming across in those upper systems. Generally, as you move from north to south, you see more normal conditions moving to drying. I mean, the Duchesne and the Yamp of the White, close to normal precip. By the time you get down to the Gunnison, the Dolores, and the San Juans, where we're looking at below normal. San Juan's about 70% in that case. April was a warm and dry month. You see that reflected in the graphic on the right, the snow water equivalent of Powell. We peaked in March 23rd, 97% median. And since then, the snow melt has been coming off. We have the previous 5 years, or previous 4 years rather, for comparison along with the median. 2024 was obviously very much kind of a median kind of year, which in retrospect is actually great. 2022, 2021, obviously dry years. 2021, very dry, but we are more or less kind of tracking along the drier years as far as SWEAK is concerned. Next slide, please. This gets carried forward, obviously, in the water supply forecast. The big takeaway here, at least immediately, is we're down 800,000 acre feet between the April 1st forecast and the May 5th forecast. That's for April to June. The two agencies that provide forecasts are in relatively good alignment, which is great. The number 3.5 million acre feet is not so great. That's below 2022. That's just one of the lowest 10 years for inflows. And then finally, we don't have mid-month forecasts from Forecast Center anymore, but they have obviously, they continue their daily product, and we've since come down another 2, maybe 300,000 for that April to July forecast. Next slide, please. It's the same story here for the water in terms of water year. We're sub 6. For water year, 5.91 million acre feet, 62% of average. The minimal probable is actually closer to 5 based on the assumptions in the modeling. So in terms of the historic record, 2022 to 2012 are kind of our analogs there. As for what to expect. Again, it can be dry, but thus far not as bad as it could be. Next slide, please. So projections. And this is the May projections, the most probable and the min probable for the 2021 study, the CRIMS, the 30 traces. If the min and most of our guide, we're looking at Powell, essentially, stable to declining conditions depending on the hydrology. Median calendar year 2025, 35, 51 feet. The most probable, 35, 42, or 43 rather, for the probable min. And by 2026, we see 35, 68 for the most probable. 35, 22.24 for probable min. Under all the scenarios, we have a 7.48 release this year, this water year. 2026, all but two of them. There's one that's a 9 million acre feet, which I'm just counting, and then there's one which is actually slightly less than 7 million acre feet. That's if we have conditions like 2002 that would follow next year. Slide, please. So with Mead, we have declining conditions going forward. Problem, range for the problem. Mid and the most probables, 1053, 1056, calendar year 2025. End of 2026, 1047, 1048 feet in elevation. Again, that one trace where you start flirting with 1025, that's that 2002 climate conditions translate into the hydrology. And with that, I think that should be it for me for slides. If you have any questions, happy to answer them online or, my contact information there if you want to discuss it offline.
Questions for James? You go back one slide. So James, for the most probable end of year 2026, how much of that outcome hovering right at the 1050 line is because of the reductions in conservation programs that we have in place? Do you know the numbers at all?
As far as I know, they aren't changed so far. The only thing that I've got from reclamation is maybe 10,000 less currently this year. But that should be back in. And most of that is going to be, quite frankly, the difference between the intervening flows between the dams and additional water coming out of California for delivery of ICS.
So we'll remember for everyone that outcome there, the green dashed line, there's 100 feet of water in Lake Mead that wouldn't otherwise be there. So picture that line 100 feet lower. Picture all three of those lines at Lake Mead 100 feet lower. So thank goodness that we've had those reductions in line and we've been able to come up with additional conservation. Otherwise, we'd be, from a water supply standpoint, in a lot worse shape, well below 1025.
All right, I misinterpreted your question.
No, that's fine. Okay, thank you. We can move then to item 6 on our agenda, Salt River and Verde River Watersheds Water Supply Update. Stephen Flora from SRP will give us that presentation.
All right, thank you. Good to be here to talk about Salt and Verde and SRP water supply. To start with some good news. 2 years ago, we had one of the wettest winters we've seen since 2005 and the snowiest, biggest snowpack since the 90s. That helped refill SRP reservoirs completely full. And we rely on those really wet years that we get periodically through these drought periods to help refill the system to get through very dry years like we're seeing today. So last winter, in 2024, we saw an average winter, but this winter, as everybody knows, we're in one of those extreme dry winters where, next slide, and that was the case on the Salt and Verde watershed or so far in water year 2025. So we saw last summer in 24, we saw a very dry monsoon, and then that continued throughout most of the fall there and into most of the winter until really into March is where we saw some significant precipitation. But at that point, the watershed is in very dry soil moisture conditions, very dry antecedent conditions. So we did get some snow accumulation in March. You can see March precipitation on the Salt and Verde was above normal. Even April was above normal slightly. But overall, because of how dry it was leading into March, we only saw about 4.92 inches of precipitation on average so far in water year 2025, which is about 49% of normal. If you go to the next slide, you can see that that was the case. We did have about almost half of that in March, 2.38 inches. And really those storms that we saw in March and early April favored the Verde watershed. You can see it was about 5.75 on the Verde and just a little over 4 inches on the Salt. So the Verde did get favored. You can see some of those areas between Flagstaff and the rim there above Payson were some of the higher amounts. Only not much in the White Mountains, a little bit on the White River on the west side of the White Mountains, but very little significant precipitation over on Salt. Those storms in March were colder, so there was some snow. Aaron mentioned that peak by mid-March, we got up to around median, but it was well below leading up to that. And by mid-March, the peak snowpack is on the decline by then. So later into March and April, it's not, if you get a significant snowstorm, it's not hard to be above median. So even though we had a very dry winter, this is the third consecutive March. Some positive glimmer. So a third above normal March precipitation that we've had in a row, 2023, 24, and 25. So we did have one good month. But overall, very dry on Salt and Verde, like most of the state. Next slide. If we look at the snowpack, you can see that graph again, a little more detail. The blue line on that graph is the SWE from this year. The green line's last year, dotted line's median. Most of the year we were well below, 50% below, kind of during that peak February, early March time period. It wasn't until later in March where we saw that get to median because of those later second half of March. We saw some snow and then it melted. That picture in the upper middle there is in the Verde watershed, mid to late March, where that snowpack's starting to melt. Most of that water soaked into the ground, infiltrated into the ground due to how dry conditions. We saw very little of it running off into the streams and into the reservoirs. And then the picture on the left is up in the C.C. Cragen watershed in early April. And then we did get you can see those little blips in the blue, some April snowstorms, but again, very little impact to our runoff. But did help provide some additional moisture to the watershed, particularly the Verde, which helps the conditions on the Verde slightly. Next slide. The salt, you can see really didn't see much at all this winter. We saw a little bit in March, but that's still at best 15% of median. So well below, you can see some of these after the snowstorms in March, very little bit amount of snow across the salt watershed in the White Mountains. So next slide. What did that mean for runoff on the Salt and Verde and Tonto? You can see here, this was the upper right is the graph from January 1st through mid-May. The green line is the Verde, the blue is the Salt, and the black line is the Tonto Creek. You can see not much. That Y scale is not very big. It's pretty much, it's at 300, so we never really got above 400 CFS. Saw that slight increase both in the Salt, Tonto, and Verde. Very, very slight, 50 to 100 CFS bump from that March storms and any snow melt. But you do see a little glimmer, again, little glimmer of hope. We did see some response from that April on the Verde, not on the Salt and Tonto, but from the Verde, you saw those little increases, which means that some of that water is getting water, and so improving the watershed conditions, particularly on the Verde. As far as our forecast, because of how dry things were leading into the winter, it was low going in. We didn't expect a lot, and that's what happened, and it continued to slowly decline. Our April 1 forecast for the Salt, Tonto, Verde runoff combined for January 1 through May 31st was 97,000 acre feet, 21% of median, and that would be a new record low. We're expecting it to be a new record low. The previous record was just over 100,000 in 2018 for that January through May time period. And the last I looked last week, we were right on track still for that 97,000 acre feet for total Salt, Tonto, Verde. It was primarily due to the salt. The salt was well below all year, the salt Roosevelt gauge. Salt didn't get a lot, at that low, variations in measurements along those gauges, things like that. So that is several thousand acre feet below the previous salt record. The Verde was a few, was third, fourth lowest, something like that. But overall, will be likely to set a new record low for the January 1 through May 31st time period for Salt, Tonto, Verde inflows, the reservoirs. Next slide. So I mentioned 2 years ago we filled up, and we were still fairly high last year, above 90%. But this year, due to the dry summer, the dry fall, the dry winter, That's had continued to go slowly down. Winter's the time period where we usually see our increased storage. We saw a gradual decline from 71% from January 1 to 67% by May 12th. Currently, we're at 67%, a little over 1.5 million acre feet of total storage, about 53% storage on the Verde, 69% on the Salt. Roosevelt's about 63, both Horseshoe and Bartlett about 50%, 50 to 60%. Some of the impacts of the dry winter, we didn't deliver. We typically deliver water on the Verde in the winter months. We partially swapped over at the beginning of the year. And then we did a full swap over to the Salt to deliver the Salt and reduce the Verde deliveries to minimum because of the limited storage on the Verde by mid-February. So we were already delivering off the Salt fully to meet demand by then. The other impact was that SRP's total groundwater use plan because we did have two previous good winters, especially 2 winters ago in 2023, was only at 100,000. We increased the groundwater use for 2025 to 150,000 acre feet of pumping, so that reduced our surface water use slightly. And it will likely increase again in 2026, probably at least by that another amount, 50,000 or more. 200,000 or so. CC Cragen also up on the rim saw very little, about 100 acre feet, so stayed right around that 24-25% full capacity. Next slide. With that being said, the drier winter, the drought conditions, but because of those previous winters that I mentioned, we're actually still above median storage for the last 25, 30 years, 30-year median. We're above median storage slightly, but so this graph here, the red line is the last few years of actual storage, and then the gray bands are the percentiles, with that black line being the median reservoir storage throughout the year. We expect that the red line will continue kind of similar to that median line and probably be right at median by the end of the year, right about 50% full, potentially. And then you can see on the drought map, I mentioned the difference between the Verde. The Verde got a little more, keeping it kind of in that severe or moderate, whereas the Salt was more in the severe drought conditions. So next slide. Now back to the glimmer of hope that Mark mentioned. The above normal chance of monsoon, that trend, also is on the Salt and Verde watershed. When we see a below normal, we tend to see that graph shows, when you see a below normal, like we saw December through March, precipitation, you have a 48% chance statistically of having above normal precipitation. We saw a very good one in 2021. That was actually the third. Well, this will be the first lowest winter runoff. 2018 was the second, and 2021, that was the third lowest runoff winter we saw. After 2021, we saw one of the wettest, a very wet monsoon. We actually got like the 10th highest runoff, which was about 250,000 acre feet, which is the 10th highest monsoon. But that's still only half of the median winter inflow. So while that will help, and it is double what we are looking at this year, but likely will be somewhere in the middle between. I would like to say we could get a 2021, but I'm not gonna say that we will. But those wetter monsoons not necessarily add storage, but they can help the decline. Like I said, we are at 67%. We're projecting 50%. If we get a wetter monsoon, maybe that's only a few. Maybe instead of being 15%, maybe it's only a 5% decline throughout our high summer demand months and things like that. So it could help going in, keeping those reservoirs higher going into the winter monsoon. And we'll see how the winter turns out for the next year. All right. Thank you very much. If there's any questions?
Questions for Stephen? The swapping to the Salt at that point in time is pretty jarring.
Yeah, it was similar in 2018 and maybe even 2021, but yeah, it was very dry years.
All right. So maybe, James, your presentation was better than you thought it was. Compared to our in-state Salt and Verde. Okay. We'll go to agenda item 7, impacts of drought on hydropower. Ed Garak, Executive Director of Irrigation Electrical District Association.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you for
Do you
letting
have
me.
any better news for us?
Uh,
No,
not terrible. But, so yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. For those, just as a reminder, AIDA or Irrigation Electrical District Association is a statewide member that primarily focuses on federal hydropower. Arizona has a public preference law, which allows for federal hydropower to be contracted first to districts, special tasking districts. So next slide, please. I know this is math and we're doing a presentation, but this is the formula for hydropower. It's pretty simple. Basically, H is the elevation distance, the elevation delta between the upper and lower pools. Q is the flow. So the drought over the last 25 years has had significant impacts on both. And we'll get into those slides a little bit later. Flow more than elevation change, but if you get low enough, there's some really dire consequences that can take effect. Next slide, please. I thought it would be good to share with you guys the amount of percentages from the federal Colorado River federal dams. Arizona gets a little under 20% from Hoover, about 18% from the Chris system, and 56% from Parker and Davis dams. So while it's not a huge amount of capacity, the capacity equates to roughly 4.4% of the total capacity of the state of Arizona. Hydropower provides some very great ancillary benefits to integrating renewables. They're able to ramp significantly, especially during the duck curve. So it's a very valuable piece of Arizona. So out of that 893 megawatts that Arizona gets, that would translate to about 180,000 homes, depending on average usage, and just under 500,000 people. So about 6% of the people in Metro Phoenix could get their full energy allocation from the dams if they were at full capacity. So next slide, please.
can you go back? Just before you stay on the dam slide. Is that Freudian or did you put Hoover Doom on purpose?
That was not.
It's not an editorial comment about, you can move on. Sorry. What was that proposed?
Intentional. So back in 2000, when the elevations of the dams were significant and water releases were quite a bit higher. You can see the generation numbers in gigawatt hours. Just a point of reference, Hoover was roughly at 1,200 feet. Max elevation in Lake Mead is 1,220. So next slide, please. So depending on which year you use, so 2022 was the lowest for the Chris facilities, 2023 for Hoover and Parker and Davis. Those are the generations, those years. Next slide, please. So we're talking about, depending on the project, 41 to 48% of reduction. Parker and Davis are more regulating dams, and California gets a large percentage of that water. So the water passes through those more. So that's why their impacts are less. Next slide, please. This is recent revelation and bad news for us. Much like Glen Canyon Dam has some infrastructure concerns if the elevation gets too low, Hoover has a problem if it gets below 1035. So back a little while ago, they put in low head turbines, but they only replaced 5 of them. So if the elevation gets below 1035, essentially 12 of the 17 turbines we're gonna have cavitation experience. So you can run as much water as you can through those 5, assuming there's no maintenance issues, but your capacity will go from 1,300 down to 382, which, losing 70% of your capacity would be a very significant impact. Next slide, please. Some positive news is we're not looking at getting below 1035 for the next couple of years. There's like a 20% chance in 2028 that it might get that low in some of the traces, but that gives us some time, our customers, Bureau of Reclamation, WAPA, to address this situation at Hoover. Next slide, please. On a positive note, the new administration's view on hydropower, President Trump's been quoted as one of the best things you can do, hydro. Not only did he call it great, he called it great. They'd like to use hydropower to meet energy needs. There's only 3% of the dams in the US that actually has a power capacity or a power generation ability. Unfortunately, most of the ones in the West are fully developed. So there's not a lot of resources out west that we could add to existing dams that are unpowered, but there is a significant amount of energy availability to the east. The president and his administration has stood up the National Energy Dominance Council. We submitted some comments to hopefully encourage some impacts that will help the federal hydropower system. We've talked about a hydropower czar. There's even a potential hydropower executive order out there. We're not quite sure if it's strictly dealing with the kind of the Snake River Dams MOU up in the Northwest, or if they're going to broaden that. And then earlier in the year, he did an executive order with the Delta smelts to try to release water from Northern California down to Southern California. And he called it the People Over Fish executive order. There might be some impacts for some other issues on the river that could help federal hydropower with regards to that executive order or something similar. So next slide, please. Some of the things that we're working on, we got the Help Hoover Dam reintroduced into the Congress again this year. There's also an appropriations play, but that would free up $52 million to be used for operation, maintenance, repair at Hoover. We know we can't increase the generation unless we replace some turbines, and even that would be minimal upratings with that. Since COVID, there's been a $40 million shortfall. So we've approached a couple of members of Congress to do a Hoover Foundation bill, much like the National Park Service Foundation, to generate donations to help offset some of the costs at Hoover. Everything that all the power customers are on the hook for any of the costs at Hoover. So even the tourism, if there's a shortfall, if it doesn't cover the cost of tourism, the power customers pay for that. And then I mentioned the National Energy Dominance Council letter. We'd like to see the federal government recognize hydropower as renewable, which would impact the cost of renewable energy credits, I feel. So just as a comparison, solar RECs in Arizona are selling for about $7 a megawatt hour, where hydropower is just a little over $2. So if we could get them on par, that would help the hydropower customers. We talked about some of the hydropower expansion, pump storage. SRP is working on a pump storage project, and also Meade substation is fully built out, but there's some opportunities to expand that, and also maybe put a bulk electric storage system there to help firm up, gain some of that solar glut in California, firm some of that up, and then natural gas pipeline and storage into Arizona would be helpful for the power grid. So next slide, please. Thanks. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ed? So Ed, maybe I think Ed, Glen Canyon, we've been advocating strongly to address the infrastructure issues there. Are the feds looking at that for Hoover Dam now that this issue arose with the cavitation in those 12 of the 17 turbines?
Well, yes, they are. They're looking to put a request in to replace those turbines. We're trying to work with the Bureau on how many we actually need, because obviously you're not gonna need 12 new turbines if the water going through is, let's say, 9 million acre feet. So we're trying to figure that out. The initial estimate we thought was 80 million to replace the turbines. That the actual came back about twice that. So in this austerity measure, it'll be interesting to see if we can get some money for things that.
Thanks. All right, the next agenda item then is impacts of drought on hydropower from Western Area Power Administration, John Polson.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you folks today. I'll maybe build a little bit on what Ed talked about, maybe talk a little bit more about kind of the dollars behind some of the costs associated with the loss of hydropower. Next slide, please. So WAPA, we're a power marketing administration within the Department of Energy. There's 4 of us. Our headquarters is located just outside of Denver. We only supply wholesale electricity, and we market and deliver federal hydroelectric power to our customers. As you can see on the map, WAPA customers span 15 states throughout the central and western US, primarily co-ops, municipalities, tribal nations, military installations, and other nonprofits. There's 17,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines across the WAPA footprint. We market energy to 700 customers who provide that electricity to more than 40 million people. Here in Arizona, we're operating the Desert Southwest region, headquarters here in Phoenix, and the Colorado River dams on the Colorado River dams operated by Reclamation, Lynn Canyon, Hoover, Davis, and Parker. Next couple slides, I'll focus on the Parker and Davis project. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the current fiscal year, water year, generation and purchases for Parker Davis. We show the actual data for the first 6 months of the year, and then our projections for the final 6 months. The blue is the hydropower that's being produced at Parker and Davis, a total of 1,189 gigawatt hours. And then on top of that, the purchases to firm up our Parker Davis contracts, that's 241 gigawatt hours. So we're forecasting to purchase rather than generate about 17% of the power that we provide to our customers. So doesn't seem that bad, but maybe we should take a look at what the costs are associated with that. So that's next slide, please. So the pricing, as you can see, that's in orange, and that's the average purchase price per megawatt hour by month for each of the months here in fiscal year 25. Once again, we've got 6 months of actuals and the 6 months of the forecast. The prices run from a low of 48 to about 118 in August. So the average price is kind of misleading. There are times when prices spike, times of system stress and disruption, heat loss or extreme heat, or maybe a loss of a transmission capacity. So when those events happens, those per megawatt price can reach sometimes $1,000 per megawatt. In our purchase strategy, we try to minimize that exposure and purchase in advance, but the risk of that is that the amount of hydro we receive is also variable. So we may purchase more or less depending on what the actual conditions require. So this shows the price of the power we purchase, and it is obviously a lot higher than the Parker Davis project rates, which is in the blue. That's based on our cost-based rates. That's the rate our customers pay for Parker Davis, but obviously with this continuation of purchase power, there's a lot of pressure on those rates, and they've been increasing. So next slide, please. This gives you a little idea of how those purchases are impacting kind of the rate. So the quantity of power and the price of the power and what it means kind of to the overall cost. So WAPA's responsible for repaying the cost of the dam, the Parker Davis project. And typically the cost of just managing those facilities is around $18 million. And so you can see that in 2024, we actually spent $24 million on purchase power. So that's, $6 million more than what we typically have to fund just to operate the project. And if you roll everything up, it's about 58% of the operating cost. So going forward, you can see that the purchase power still continues to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of the costs associated with those projects until you get to 2029. And so what WAPA is in the process of doing right now is changing the marketing plan for Parker Davis project. We're going to align the releases and the deliveries from Parker Davis more in tune with the actual hydro available. So that's why we're showing less purchases in those final 2 years that are 29 and 30. Now, with these reductions, that means that those customers are probably going to have to go out and find a replacement for that power. And so that's, unless they have the ability to fund, some sort of generation on their own, that they may be exposed to some of those, higher price purchases. So next slide, please. This is a cost estimate that we did for drought, and on the Hoover side, it's mostly related to replacement power. We've never done firming for Hoover. That's always been more of a run of the river product. In the case of Parker Davis, where we have been doing firming, at least we will up until the end of 28. Those costs associated with the replacement power are rolled up into the rate. You can see that we tried to capture all of the aspects that Ed was talking about that are so valuable, especially with Hoover. The ancillary services, the resource adequacy, and there's greenhouse gas benefits. And so both of these, projects, the drought cost associated with both of them is pretty impactful, especially over the next few years. And I think the next slide is just a list of Arizona customers that take power from Hoover and Parker Davis on both. And so they're the ones that we work with to try to manage these costs and doing everything we can to work through this. And I think that's it.
Thanks. Questions for John? I have one. If you go back to the Hoover slide, that one. Do you know, John, off the top of your head, what delivery of water through Hoover did you assume for this drought cost estimate?
We made assumptions based on kind of the lower releases. What we used at the time was kind of a worst case scenario, but that's been a little bit of time has passed since then, and so it may be that for some of these release years, we might want to go back and take another look. But it projecting out past 26 or 27, it's pretty difficult.
So when you say worst case, I don't know how familiar you are with the discussions about post 2026 ops, but Lower Basin States proposed more or less a permanent 1.5 million acre foot reduction, right? You did something worse than that?
It was probably in line with that.
It's good to know that. Thank you. Okay, moving onward. Then item 9, 2025 wildfire outlook. Tiffany Davila, Department of Forestry and Fire Management.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for accommodating me virtually. I'm still up here on the Greer fire, so I appreciate that. So we're going to talk about the fire season and kind of what's in store for us over the next couple of months. Next slide, please. So our typical trends in fire activity, spring, early summer, predominantly human caused. That's when we see the bulk of our human caused starts. We start to see that trend shift once we get into our monsoon season, where we then proceed with the lightning strike fires during that time of the year. Our fire season and activity is dictated by the winter and spring moisture. So there's really a combination of factors that go into what our outlook is going to be. And that really goes back as far as the previous winter. So, we had a lack of precipitation across the state. We have heavy fuel loading in certain parts of the state. Drought-stricken fuel. The drought is impacting us. All of this is impacting us right now up here on the Greer fire. And then, of course, our climate patterns as well. And then our monsoon season typically signals the end to the high fire activity. And unfortunately, we don't have a fire season in Arizona anymore. We have year-round fire. We've experienced that with the Horton fire in December. We had fires push out well into October in 2024 due to the warm temperatures and a lack of precipitation. So we really do experience fire year-round here now in Arizona. Next slide, please. So for this year, our significant fire potential will be highest during the breezy, windy, and dry periods, focused along the southeastern part of the state. Again, really, we have that statewide drought, severe drought, but really we're seeing the impacts in southeastern Arizona. Our activity as we warm up could push further north. Drought conditions persist with impacts to fine fuel vegetation. We have extreme drought conditions across 60% of the state. And then above normal fuel loads along and south of the Mogollon. Next slide, please. We're seeing an overall up and down weather pattern. We've experienced that over the last couple of months, cooler temperatures, then a spike in temperatures, then some precipitation, no precipitation. So really all of that is really what's going to play a role into what we're going to experience here over the next couple of months. And then windier spring pattern, which we've seen. We've had plenty of red flag warnings already. We've had 3 days of red flag warnings back to back on the Greer fire up here. And that's really what produced that extreme fire behavior during the initial start of this fire. And then as we were hearing, the monsoon season could provide us with ample precipitation. So our fingers are crossed for that. As we move into our monsoon season, again, that trend will shift from human caused starts to lightning strike starts. And then hopefully that ample precipitation will put an end to activity during the summer. Next slide, please. And then kind of just a breakdown, we have potential for high fire activity statewide. Northern Arizona, especially in this area, Navajo and Apache counties have had minimal snowpack, statewide lack of precipitation. We have drought stress fuel across the state, and we've had above average temperatures, as Aaron had mentioned, in the fall. And then, kind of that roller coaster of temperatures that we've been seeing, normal temperatures, high temperatures, lack of precipitation, some precipitation. So we've been on a roller coaster with our weather the last couple of months. And then areas like southern, southeastern Arizona could see more intense fire and longer duration incidents. And we've already had 2 fires down in that area in the last month. Next slide, please. So I kind of just wanted to give everyone a quick overview of the Greer fire. Of course, these numbers have changed since yesterday. We're sitting at 20,308 acres. We do now have 55% containment on the fire. We did lift the GO evacuations last night. So those residents that were impacted by the GO status are now in set. 676 personnel are still assigned to the fire. From the initial start on this fire, it was wind driven through drought stress fuel in the Greer area. The fire is also burning in the Wallow Fire burn scar, and it started last Tuesday, so a week ago in Greer. Just kind of a side note, the Wallow Fire started on May 29th. So early start in this area. Next slide, please. And then the fires that we've already experienced here, we had the Stronghold fire near Cochise Stronghold down in southeastern Arizona. That was 2,100 acres. We're at 100% containment on that, still under investigation. And then the Bryce fire west of Safford between Pima and Eden. 3294 was the acres, and we're about 90% contained on that fire. The cause of that fire was a UTV rollover that sparked the fire. So next slide, please. And then statewide fire activity. So these numbers also have changed since I did this presentation. Right now for 2025 year to date, we're looking at 462 fires that have burned 38,000 acres. For 2024 year to date, 418 fires that burned about 27,000 acres. So an increase of about 10,000 acres so far this year. For all of 2024, we had a little over 2,100 fires for 280,000 acres burned. And that number was higher, acres burned increased from 2023. Next slide, please. And then again, just going over the drought outlook. So May of this year compared to May of last year, you can see the significant difference due to the lack of precipitation over the fall and the winter months. So really, you know, where we're looking at is where the red, the exceptional drought, is where we could see a lot of that fire activity. And then once we start warming up and get into our typical summer temperatures, dry conditions, we're going to see that fire activity just really spread across the state. Next slide, please. And then again, just looking at what our conditions would look like for April, May, we're starting to see eastern down into southeastern. Obviously, we're experiencing that now with the Greer fire, with the activity in Apache and Navajo counties. We had the Coyote fire about a week and a half ago. That was also northeast of Springerville. It was about 1,200 acres. That one was 100% contained. And then by June, we have pretty much statewide fire activity. And then July is showing that we could come out of our fire activity given the forecast of the ample monsoon. So let's just have our fingers crossed for a good monsoon this year. Next slide, please. And then kind of just wanted to mention this again. I've mentioned it before, but last year the governor signed HB 2751 into effect. It allows the state to go direct with other states in the Great Plains Interstate Compact. So kind of bypassing the federal ordering system when we're looking for resources. And we could tap into the compact for anything from personnel, overhead, engines, hand crews, even aircraft. So this is a really good resource to have at our advantage because it allows more resources to be brought into the state when we start to get very busy. We've already tapped into the compact this year. We have a task force of engines from Utah. So some fire departments in Utah brought some fire engines down here. We have a task force pre-positioned in southern Arizona to help with any new initial attacks down in southern and southeastern Arizona. So this is a really handy tool. It's going to be very beneficial for us. Of course, the federal partners, tribal partners can also use these resources that we've brought into the state as well. And next slide, please. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate again. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Tiffany. Questions for Tiffany from the members? I thought I saw a question from someone in the public pop up. Could we access that question?
You mind if I just read it, Tom?
Go ahead.
John Donahue from Courthouse News Service is asking about the Greer fire, Tiffany. He says the slide said that the Greer fire has burned 20,833 acres, but then a later slide said that 17,887 acres in total have burned so far this year. Can you clarify what the first slide meant?
Right. So I did, and I'm sorry because the numbers keep changing day by day. So the Greer fire is 20,308 acres. So that changed due to more accurate mapping. Those numbers have been kind of fluctuating. We've been doing IR flights every day. So 20,308 acres. For the year to date, I'm assuming that's what he's speaking about. Year to date acres burned 38,000 for 2025. Does that clarify what your question was?
Thanks, Tiffany, and
Got
thanks
it.
for taking time out of, I'm sure, your busy schedule with the Greer Fire to join us today. Thank you.
You're
We'll
welcome.
move on then to the next agenda item, item 10. 2024-2025 Forest Health Update. Viridiana Quinones Navarez from, again, Department of Forestry and Fire Management. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So BD Quinones, Forest Health Specialist with Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. Today I'll just be reporting on our 2024 summer activity. Next slide. So to start, I'll just give you all a little bit of background on the data I'm presenting today. In collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service, we at DFFM conduct annual aerial surveys of dead and dying trees around the state and identify areas of insect and disease occurrences. We work together to ground truth the areas identified during our aerial survey season to confirm insect and disease data that was recorded. In times of significant drought, trees become increasingly stressed and are therefore more susceptible to insect and disease infestations. Several damage causal agents are always brought up in these reports, specifically bark beetle caused tree mortality increases following times of drought. So their activity can be an indicator of drought severity. And all this data is provided to land managers and the public in our Forest Health Conditions Report annually, so it can be found on our website if you would like more details. Next slide. So here's the map showing all the insect and disease observations from 2024 in comparison to the drought conditions during the surveys. Surveys are typically conducted from July through September. And drought and temperature impacts forest health and increases the likelihood of pathogens and insect infestations. And most of this damage occurred within areas that were experiencing moderate to severe drought conditions. There are some scattered observations in the woodlands and in the Sky Islands of southern Arizona, but as usual, the majority of our observations are seen along and above the Mogollon Rim there, where the bulk of our ponderosa pine forests are found. Next slide. So I'll start with some general statewide observations and then jump into specific damage types. So in 2024, just over 15 million acres were surveyed in Arizona. There was an overall increase in bark beetle related tree mortality and also an increase in drought related tree damage when compared to that of 2023. This picture is a classic example of bark beetle infested ponderosa pines. At a close-up glance, this was taken east of Payson of last year. Next slide. So during the summer of 2023, just over 17,000 acres with bark beetle caused mortality were observed. In the summer of 2024, that number increased to 33,000 acres, most seen on federal lands, so just a little under doubled. This picture on the right shows western balsam bark beetle damage in the Apache Sitgraves National Forest. Next slide. And more than 11,000 acres with defoliator damage were observed last summer. And if defoliation is severe enough, it can lead to the death of the host tree. More than half of the acres with defoliation damage were attributed to that of Tamarisk leaf beetle along riparian areas. The picture to the right shows Tamarisk leaf beetle damage along the San Carlos. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate, high temperatures and severe drought conditions contribute to an increase in insect and disease activity. So with repeated drought events along with water stress and other attributing factors over many years can lead to death of trees. In 2024, over 9,000 acres were observed with drought damage. This was almost a double an increase compared to that of 2023 with over 5,000 acres. And most drought damage was seen in ponderosa pine and high elevation forests. Next slide. I'm just sharing some more photos. Photo on the left is scattered bark beetle damage on the Tonto National Forest. There's some pockets there, and what you're seeing is the brown trees. And on the right are scattered bark beetle infested trees on the Coconino. Next slide. I also wanted to give an update on what we saw in our urban forests as well. Due to the extreme heat and lack in moisture, tree care professionals observed an increase in Mediterranean pine mortality caused by the invasive Mediterranean pine engraver throughout the Phoenix metro and Tucson areas. This map shows the locations of known MPE observations through our invasive insect trapping program. Their activity appears to be directly correlated with temperature and humidity. They prefer low humidity and high temperatures. Traps were placed in 2024, and we found MPE in 2 new locations, Sedona and Cottonwood, confirmed by Forest Service entomologists. Next slide. So these maps show progression of the drought conditions in Arizona leading to the 2024 survey season to this upcoming survey season. So like I said, moisture improves forest health. Trees have better defenses from insects and diseases. December of 2023 began with above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation, leading to the expansion of drought conditions. So the summer months, we saw continued dry conditions throughout the survey season, which led to that heightened insect and disease observations. December of 2024, we're seeing severe and extreme drought over Western Arizona, persisting into early this year with extreme to exceptional drought conditions. So at this rate, all we can hope for is an improved monsoon season that can help curb the insect and disease damage that we might see in 2025. Next slide. And that's my quick update. Any questions?
Questions from members? Seeing none, thank you, Viri.
Perfect. Thank you.
So now we'll move on to agenda item 11. It's an action item for discussion and recommendation of the drought declaration to the governor. I might quickly summarize what we heard. I heard that we have both long-term and short-term drought issues facing us. 4th driest year last year out of our historical record. We're seeing maybe a glimmer of hope with La Nina softening and weakening, and maybe a little bit of hope for a monsoon. Our water supply on Colorado River is not in good shape, with a 62% average runoff facing us. That's a pretty low runoff, and facing us maybe at the end of 2026 going into tier 2. Lake Mead elevation below 1050. We heard from Stephen with SRP that this is likely their lowest runoff year ever, which is pretty disturbing. We heard the negative impacts on hydropower, both in the big Colorado River dams, but also in Parker Davis, and the impacts on prices to the consumers and the users of those power resources. And we heard lastly, the wildfire issues facing us and the negative forest health impacts that are facing us. So before I turn to the members of the committee, are there members of the public that would like to offer anything up for our consideration as we deliberate over this recommendation? Seeing none, how about members of the public online?
You did raise her hand.
Leslie,
Hi, Tom. I'm Leslie James with the Colorado River Energy
can you come
Distributors.
so that people
Oh.
can hear you online? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Leslie James with the Colorado River Energy Distributors Association, or CREDA. I represent the Colorado River Storage Project customers. So I wanted to add a little bit to John's presentation. In the state of Arizona, there are 45 tribes and not-for-profit entities that are purchasers of the CRSP resource. Glen Canyon is the largest, 75% or so. So we too, I was glad to hear Tom talk about the state urging infrastructure. We're working with Senator Lee's office to hopefully get some language that will encourage reclamation to look at infrastructure at Glen Canyon Dam. That's something we've been interested in for many, many years. So we look forward to working with the state on that as well. One last thing, just from a personal standpoint, I wanted to thank the DFFM. I was evacuated from my home up in Eager on Tuesday. And ironically, or not, I had just finished working with John Arona and others on my veg and fire management plan for my lands 3 weeks ago. So DFFM has done an amazing job up there with the clearing they've been doing on state lands and working with the people. So thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Anyone else online perhaps have comments for the group? So hearing none, I will ask members of the group if they have anything to add into my summary of note that we should consider before we make our recommendation. And I'm not seeing anything. So from my perspective, I think all of these items that we've heard about today, certainly in my mind, result in us needing to make a recommendation to the governor to maintain the drought declaration. Does anybody have a different view of that? Not hearing or seeing any of that. So as we always do, we will make that recommendation to the governor. Staff will draft that recommendation for transmittal to the governor's office, and we'll put in some of the key points that we know we all heard today that are resulting in that recommendation. And again, just for everyone's edification, the benefits of that declaration are partly that the U.S. Department of Agriculture can provide assistance for the impacts. We want to raise awareness of our situation in our state. We want to send a strong message about drought and its impacts. And we want to continue to keep drought at the forefront for our citizens who are living with the impacts of those droughts, both in all the sectors we talked about today. So with that, we already did the call to the public, so I will not repeat that unless any members of the group have anything to add. Yes.
Good morning.
Come up here, near the
Okay.
microphone. Thanks.
It wasn't based on the recommendation. So I'm Keisha Tatum. I'm the state conservationist with the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I haven't been here in person in a while. And I just want to come. One, we have a new staff person I want to introduce to the group. Jamila Russell is our new state resource conservationist for about a little over a year now. And Travis Coling, who is our program manager for a snow survey program. You showed some of the data today from our snowtail sites and measuring the snowpack. And I just wanted to come before the group, one, to make sure to introduce Jamila as being the manager over Travis, so that so there's gonna be some connection of some names and some faces. And if there's anything that's needed from us, by all means, as it relates to our data, from our snow survey program, that we are available for you. So I just wanted to make that introduction. So it wasn't about the recommendation.
No, fine. Thank you, Keisha.
You're
And
welcome.
we appreciate all of the support and information you provide with us. Hoping that you continue to have the resources available to you to continue that with us, because it's so very important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that then, hearing nothing else and seeing no other hands raised, we will adjourn until our fall meeting of this group. And again, recognizing in the interim, smaller work groups are always working. And that plays into what we all hear in the biannual meeting. So thank you to everyone for all your good work, and have a good rest of your day.